Hello everyone, my name is Mark Reasoner. I'm a student at Biola University at Talbot School of Theology, and this week I'm going to be presenting on some underappreciated research in the field of Bible, and I am going to be highlighting the book of Leviticus this week, showing why it's underappreciated and how we can move forward and appreciate the book more for the wonderful content that it brings. So before I start, I would just want to really thank Dr. Carmen Imes for having me on her channel and letting me produce this video and highlight some underappreciated things that I think that should be highlighted in the field of Bible scholarship. So I first want to encourage everybody that we just came out with the Illustrated Psalms volume that Dr. Imes and I did. This is 1 through 72 and 73 through 150, and I've got the big one right here. That's the entire Psalms combined. And right now I'm actually working on the Leviticus installment for the series, so I'm going to be spending all summer translating the book of Leviticus. That'll be what my entire summer will consist of. And right now I've been gathering research for months, and I am 3 chapters into translating Leviticus. I've got a lot ahead of me, but I'm hoping to finish sometime soon. In one of my college classes, I had the opportunity to read Leviticus cover to cover with the Torah. So I read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then we even read Joshua. And when I read the book, questions came to my mind like, why is the priest touching a animal that is supposedly making them unclean when they're doing a sacrifice? How does that work? Is it wrong to be unclean? Why is a woman bringing a sin offering when she just had a child? And why is somebody unclean for double the amount of time when they have a female baby versus a male baby? These questions are very good questions that we should be asking when we read the book of Leviticus to pique our interest in the book. It's such a hard book to read, but when we ask these questions and don't just let them go and try to figure out the answers, we can often come to really good answers and really good conclusions, especially when we have resources that can help us along the way and we don't feel totally stranded and on our own. Oftentimes, when we try to read Leviticus, it's when we start a year-long Bible read through and we get to the end of Exodus and we've been checking through all these laws, and then we get to Leviticus and it's like, oh my gosh, we've got the burnt offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, and we're just reading all of these laws, and there's not as much of a progression of a story. But reading it chiastically, we see that there is a structure to a story, and that the entire center of the book is all about how can an Israelite enter into God's household, the place that he dwells, which is sacred space. Unfortunately, Leviticus is one of the most ignored books in Christian circles and most modern circles today. So I want to recommend some really good accessible resources that can help us read Leviticus and help answer some of our questions and have somebody along with you to guide you while reading the book so that you don't feel lost and stranded. I encourage everybody to go back and watch the previous Torah Tuesday on Leviticus. And what first piqued my interest in the book of Leviticus was that people started calling it the heart of the Torah because it is structured chiastically, and that the Day of Atonement is the culmination of the book of Leviticus. So I was wondering, why do people call it the heart of the Torah when it's so hard for us to read and I wasn't understanding hardly any of it? So I certainly think that we believe that the book of Leviticus is underappreciated. I mean, every single podcast almost that you listen to is going to start out the podcast, if they are talking about Leviticus, saying, well, we know, this book is really hard to read and it's very confusing, but we're going to do it anyway because we have to. Or they're going to say, it's a very fascinating book, but it's mostly really hard for people to read or understand, or people don't like it. I mean, when is the last person that you have met said, when you ask them, what's your favorite book of the Bible? And they said, Leviticus is my favorite book of the Bible. Nobody says that. And When is the last time you heard a sermon preached on Leviticus? And lastly, how does it feel when we start to read it? When we're in those chronological Bible reading times and we're trying to read through the whole Bible and we get to the end of Exodus and we start bogging through Leviticus. When you finish Leviticus, you're like, yes, we're done. And then we get to Numbers. So a lot of the times it's very hard for people in a modern context to read law books because we're so removed from the ancient context of what they would have understood law to mean and what it would be communicating. It's very hard for us in our means of communication because we want syllogisms and we want people to tell us what to do. We do like stories, so we're going to read books like Genesis. We're going to read stories like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we're going to be very fond of things like Paul, who he gives us very logical syllogisms on church do this, church don't do this. Epistles and letters are very good. The book of Leviticus may be underappreciated today, but it certainly wasn't underappreciated by Jesus, the apostles, and Paul. Paul definitely frequently refers to the book of Leviticus, and Jesus even quotes it when he says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," from Leviticus 19. The book of Leviticus has traditionally been called a priestly tech manual, or that it's instructions for the priest, but the book of Leviticus doesn't actually tell you how to do a sacrifice. It tells you how to take out the fat which belongs to Yahweh. It tells you what you need to do, but what it doesn't tell you is how to clean the altar. It doesn't tell you where to cut the animal. It doesn't tell you what knife to use. On the Day of Atonement, the book doesn't actually tell you what to do if the goat comes back, so it's not a priestly tech manual. What the book of Leviticus is about is how somebody who has been saved by Yahweh can enter into sacred space where Yahweh dwells while being safe, because Yahweh is a God of life and not a God of death, and his presence is dangerous. His presence is dangerous, although he is loving and compassionate and kind. He is other, and he is so other that when you approach him, we need to be careful and make sure that we are fit for sacred space and that we do not bring in signs of death, because we are mortal beings and we've inherited the problem of death into our world, and we need to make sure that we are ritually pure before entering into sacred space, and we'll be expounding upon that more next week. If you're looking at buying a Leviticus commentary, Jacob Milgrom is going to be the first place that you would want to start. He has the most expansive commentary on Leviticus, answering almost every question that you're going to have, but it's a very dense read and it's very long and very expensive. So one alternative and one really good, not second place to Milgrom, but a very good commentary that I recommend is the Jewish Publication Society commentary. Baruch Levine is a world-renowned scholar who taught at New York University, NYU, in Ancient Near Eastern Studies, and I highly recommend this. It's not as expensive as Jacob Milgrom's, and the layout is the Hebrew text with the English, and then Baruch Levine's commentary notes. It's a beautiful layout where you can see the English and the Hebrew and the notes. The podcast that I highly recommend listening to is the Naked Bible podcast on Leviticus. There's hours of podcasts to listen to, and I really recommend listening to the podcast while having your Bible open and looking at the text along with them. It will really, really help make Leviticus a lot more bearable, and will really help open up new questions and new insights and ways to read the book. For me, this was the most formative podcast, and my understanding of the book of Leviticus has really, really helped me. And the things that I learned from that podcast, I'm always going to my friends and saying, look at this, what I learned. What do you think about this? I really highly recommend listening to that podcast. Another resource that you could use to frame the big story of Leviticus, again, in addition to Dr. Imes' YouTube series on Leviticus, I really recommend Ron Johnson's Daily Dose of Bible on Leviticus. If you're in the Heiser community, you can have access to watching the videos. If you're not, join the community and you'll be able to watch the videos. And he really takes us through what is the big story of Leviticus, what's its place in the entire narrative of the Torah and of the Bible, and I highly recommend listening to it. In Jewish learning, Leviticus is the first starting point for little children when they start reading the Torah. In Leviticus Rabbah 7:3, it says, "Why does one begin teaching the children from the book of Leviticus, and one does not begin with Genesis? It is because the children are pure and the offerings are pure. Let the pure come and engage in the pure." So I encourage you as the pure to come and engage in the pure, which is the book of Leviticus, and check out some of the resources that I have talked about, and I encourage you to check out some of the resources that I have listed down in the comments section. And I also encourage you to read the book of Leviticus and see what you can learn and what questions you can come up with before we meet again next week.